Welcome back to The Right Ingredients. This is the podcast where we explore the talent, leadership, and hiring challenges shaping the specialty ingredients world. Today, we're diving into a topic that a lot of companies tiptoe around, but everyone in the industry is dealing with it in some form. Restructuring, redundancy, and what it actually takes to rebuild teams with intention. Now, I'm very pleased to be joined by someone who has lived this at a genuinely global scale. Pete Calabretti has led people strategy, transformation, and leadership development across organizations in healthcare, chemicals, agribusiness, food manufacturing, hospitality, and most recently at a major cocoa and chocolate producer. His experience covers everything from large-scale restructuring to global capability building and cultural change. Pete, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Charlie. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So before we get into the heavy topics, give people a quick sense of your background and experience. Tell us about your career today.
Sure. Yeah, you said a lot, right? So I think if I'm summarizing my career, I have a good 25-year plus career in the life science, FMCG business, in the industries which you mentioned. So I've been working for companies like Barry Callebaut, Siemens, Bouygues, Celgene, Syngenta in agrochemicals, Roche, Big and other firms. So that's a little bit where I'm coming from. In those companies, I always had senior HR leadership roles, led talent and cultures of expertise, and I led big transformation as a partner of senior executive teams and CEOs. And, often I came into organizations when companies decided to reorganize or when they started to introduce new operating models. And with that, I have been involved in restructurings, integration, in leadership transitions, and big cultural shifts. So that's a little bit about my career.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Well, that means you are one of the perfect people to discuss what we're going to be discussing today, which is everything that I've mentioned in the introduction about redundancies, restructuring, and rebuilding teams with intention. So let's jump straight in. So my first question is on the topic of restructuring. It gets talked a lot about in terms of cost cutting, efficiency, or transformation. But the reality is usually it's a little bit more complex. From your perspective, what are the real reasons organizations decide to restructure, and where do those conversations usually start?
So, most of those restructures actually are happening when the business model or the strategy reveals gaps, or when organizations start to have performance issues, where the complexity of the organization is somehow stopping the progress of the organization. And this is when the board and the CEO start to have the conversations. Strategy, HR, finance is involved early on in those dialogues. But there are also scenarios where top consulting firms come into play in order to explore those different scenarios.
Point there that I found interesting, because I've seen it happen across the industry, 2025 and 2024. What I saw was companies, big organizations, really restructure for various reasons, especially companies that had maybe have more of a commodity style to them that also had specialty ingredients, and then deciding which direction to take. Are they going to be focusing more on the commodity space or more on the specialty ingredient space? Cargill is a perfect example where there was a lot of restructuring that went on there to really step back from the specialty sides and really focus more on the commodity side. So I think what you mentioned there in terms of why and why these things happen, I think that's very important in terms of that restructuring. There's a gap between how restructuring decisions are viewed internally by leadership and how they land across the organization. Of course, the conversations start at board level, but how they're viewed internally to other members of the leadership team, it can trickle down in not the best of ways. So what does that decision-making process actually look like behind the scenes?
Well, I think, depending on the magnitude of the change, certain decisions are critical and need to be managed quite carefully, right? Because they can have impact in the market with investors, but also with on how you move forward, right? But usually, as I mentioned, those decisions are taken at the top of the house, and then they're consequently cascaded throughout the organization.
Hmm.
So the functions which are really at the table at that stage is finance, is HR, is strategy, and then operations.
And out of curiosity, from your past experience, once these decisions are brought up at board level and discussed, and a plan is decided, how fast do these decisions tend to move?
Yeah. So I think once the due diligence is done and once the legal implications are clear and the risk is managed, then I think, those conversations, they are communicated relatively in a fast way. But as I mentioned, it needs to be done in a mindful way, because senior management really needs to understand the rationale for change, why we are doing what we are doing, right? And what needs to happen, and what the shift from today towards the future and all the implications. And that's often, a very critical phase. I'm sure you are aware about the Kubler-Ross change curve, where in the beginning, when you're initiating change, there is often quite a bit of resistance, right? Because you're changing ways of working, you're changing decision rights, and that needs to be managed early on, right? So
Yeah.
this phase really needs attention and time before you're going full scale in the organization.
What about when companies get it wrong? Where do they typically get it wrong? Is it timing, communication, planning, sequencing? What tends to derail restructures?
Yeah. As I mentioned, as what I just said is not done properly, right?
Yeah.
I think if CEOs are not crystal clear about the start, stop, and continue of the strategy, that's one aspect where you have some passive aggressive behavior or not the right support of senior leadership. So that
Yeah.
needs to be crystal clear, and good CEOs do that pretty well. Secondly, when the required capabilities and behaviors are not defined, meaning when the roles of the future organizations are not clear, then you get quite a bit of resistance as well. Most importantly, also, it's about the capability of leaders to actually implement and drive the change in the organization. So I think that's often some of the stumbling blocks which are actually coming into the way.
Yeah, for sure.
There's research out in the market from McKinsey, and that was the case 40 years ago, and it's still the same case, that they suggest, in other consulting houses too, that the majority of transformations are not a success. And they're not a success because the financials are not clear. They're not a success because leaders and people don't understand and buy into the change. So the people aspect of transformations is often underestimated.
Sure. I think a lot of people do underestimate how disruptive these periods can be. And I think what you said there, it's very important about buy-in. If a company is going to announce a restructure, they need to get buy-in from all of the senior leadership team to then trickle that information down to employees within the company. What do you think are the most important things in the first days and weeks after such an announcement that employees actually need from leadership? Obviously, buy-in, a direction, and understanding. But is there anything else that you think is important to note there?
Well, it's clarity. It is clarity on the vision. It's clarity on the aspired state where the company want to go to. Right. That needs to be clear, and then a clear journey where people can understand what is happening by when. They don't need to understand everything, but they do need to understand the path towards the new operating model or the change, whatever is aspired to do. Particularly in the beginning, they need role models. So the leaders need to walk the talk, right? That the whole boss watching is happening. So the behaviors which are required need to be left by the leaders. And that's super critical. And then leaders need to have an ongoing drumbeat going in terms of communication, right? They need to be very close to their teams in order to help them to focus on the right priorities, to stop activities which are not in service of the transformation. So direction, clarity, and support and dialogue is super important.
Interesting. Definitely would say a why is needed, why the decision has been made, and what the future is going to look like for each individual within the business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or people that are not within the business as these decisions happen. Redundancies, they will always be difficult to manage when you're going through such a process. And they do come in from time to time when these restructures happening. So I think there's a big difference between doing them well and doing them badly. In your view, what does a respectful, well-managed redundancy process look like? And what principles do you think matter most?
Yeah. So first of all, the homework needs to be done, right? I think, all the relations in terms of, the labor relations, everything needs to be carefully managed, right? And in a very confidential manner. Once this is settled and when it is clear, leaders need to be briefed what they can say and what they can't say, because that's a discipline which none of the MBAs or business schools are good at in actually educating leaders about having those very challenging informations, right? It's just psychologically something of the most difficult which you can do as a leader. And therefore you need well-trained leaders which take it super serious, which have an approach which is respectful, which treats people with dignity. It's very important because behind every redundancies, their families, their existential situations, and that need to be dealt with the highest integrity and the highest respect for the individual. So providing leaders with a how to have the conversations, and then depending on the situation, to have the right social plans in place, the right psychological support, the open door policies of leaders who actually listen to the people which are, going to this phase of stress and disappointment is very important. So if that's done properly, then I think you have a high guarantee of a good process.
Yeah. I mean, it's no secret that restructuring does take time. Even when the decision is made, things are implemented, it's still going to take that company probably, in some cases, 2 to 3 years to really sort of adjust to that new direction. And I think an often overlooked part of restructuring is the impact on the people who stay. Because things are going to be turbulent for a few years before there is a real new sort of smooth way of going forward. So in your opinion, how do leaders keep engagement, trust, and performance high when the organization is going through such a major change?
Yeah. You're mentioning a super important topic, right? Because often people which are staying or which are confirmed, they're living in a very difficult time, right? Because there's some of shame as well, right? Of, hey, I'm here and you have to go. And so how do we continue to work together, right? And I think those staying need the equal support, right?
Yeah.
They need to have support in, okay, how do I deal now with it? And the best case is to have open conversations and to accept the very difficult situation of the ones leaving and find a way through regular dialogues to support each other, right? I think this is super important. On the other side, you are also addressing the aspects of the one staying or the high performers. How do you keep them engaged, right? So I think, that's very important to have these conversations with those key talents in order to assure them about the way forward and to support them and to give them some level of support too, right? If you can afford it as well, the adequate retention measures to keep them on board. And that's not always money, right? Sometimes it's a good conversation, a handshake, and actual conversations, right? And the right exposures.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a delicate.
And obviously, certain leadership or leadership members will have to rebuild. There will be sort of a rebuilding phase where teams need to be readjusted, people need to move into different divisions, whatever it may be. So when rebuilding teams, how do you think about balancing technical capability against certain people's behaviors, leadership maturity, and cultural fit? I mean, what do you think matters most?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think, as companies reorganize more often, new teams are formed, right?
Hmm.
Coming into the teams, and therefore team effectiveness and high performing team, that topic is super important. I think, and the leader really needs to be clear on his or her vision on how he or she wants to lead, and how the team needs to work together. So therefore, aspects of being clear on the vision, on the strategy, on ways of working, on the roles, on accountability. You can define the RACI models, which defining actually the decision rights in the organization. That needs to be defined and negotiated with the teams. And it needs to be formally captured, right? Because especially in those phases, people believe what they want to believe. So you need to formalize it in a form which is creating one reality for everyone.
Yeah,
And that's super. Yeah. And then supporting them in actually growing into the new roles or into the new operating model. For example, I went through not an organization who shifted from a regional approach to a global vertical approach, where general managers prior led the full P&L, and after transformation they were de facto sales managers. And the organization actually has somehow broken a psychological contract with those leaders. So you need to work with them so that they understand and accept what their new role is and see the benefit of actually assuming this role. And then as well to act on people which are not willing to be part of the new future.
hmm
Sometimes a no or resistance is I haven't understood it, I need more information. But if you have provided all of that, you need to act on it. These are the difficult decisions, but that's important in order that the team can grow into the new operating model.
for sure. I think you can see as well that certain restructures would happen and people can buy into it there and then, but then when they actually get going, it doesn't sit right with them. So, I mean, I see it from a recruitment standpoint. Restructures happen, people stay, they commit to it, but then 3, 6 months, 12 months down the line, they're picking up the phone, speaking to me saying, I'm thinking of something new. This doesn't sit right with me. So it's about managing not just the decision and the buy-in right at the start. It's about over the course of however long it's going to take to really sort of settle into things.
Yeah, and then the leader comes in, right? I think the leader needs to be close to the people.
Mm-hmm.
And actually define, you can call it OKRs or whatever methodology you want, but you need to be very clear on the objectives, on the behaviors, on the metrics, how you measure success. And you need to be ready to provide timely feedback, particularly in the first few months, so that people really, really understand that the change is not going away. They need to really be on the track there.
For sure. Okay. I mentioned there in terms of the recruitment side of things that I see. I mean, when companies are planning a restructure or they've just started a restructure, there is a reluctance to hire anybody new, which is totally understandable. But I do see a lot of companies panic hire after restructures.
Yeah.
Maybe they feel short-staffed and they're trying to fix it with quick hires. It usually creates problems when you rush things like this. So how should companies approach hiring in the first 3 to 6 months after a restructure when they know what gaps are missing and what expertise they need?
Yeah. Well, you're addressing a very critical topic. I think as you said, some companies overreact and hire left and right. I think there again, back to strategy, it's really to understand who are those critical roles, and more often people start to hire for the old world without having the right conversation about how is this role shifting or evolving. So therefore, you need to be very clear about what are those critical roles, what's the success profile, what's the start-stop, continue forward that role is, especially, and that's the roles where you need to focus on. And this usually takes some time, because what you need to ensure is as well that the CEO down to the leader of the leaders really are in sync about the expectation of the role. So more often you see people hiring people, and then the CEO or the other leaders say, okay, well, but I have a different point of view about what is needed. So my point is, do some proper strategic workforce planning, understand your talent strategy, and bridge the time where you are not 100% clear with temporary resources, right? Don't move too fast on that. Otherwise, as you said, after half a year, you will see a reality that people are dropping out, or you have hired in the wrong place and you have wasted resources. So being mindful, hire the right roles at the right time.
Understood. Okay. You mentioned
just one
go
thing,
on. Go ahead.
which is sorry for interrupting, but I think one thing is which is underestimated is that more often transformation C-suite leaders start with the end state of the transformation in mind, which means that they have reduced or already right-sized the organization, but during the transformation you need so often more resources in the ramp-up phase. So you need to understand who is actually taking care about the existing business and who is helping to create the future. Sometimes they're the same, but sometimes it's also valuable to have a dedicated task force to focus on that.
You mentioned earlier on in the discussion that it's a good CEO or a good C-level team that really put this together and make it easy to digest for the wider business. And you yourself, you've worked with CEOs and leadership teams around the world throughout your career. In a restructuring context, what separates the leaders who manage change well from those who really struggle?
Well, I can give you a very good example about 70,000 people company, which I supported in moving from a rather analog business into a digital business, which required a big shift. And the CEO at that time, was very aware about the magnitude of the change. And so what he did particularly well together with his executive committee is to translate the vision and strategy to the respective stakeholders. Dedicated communication to investors, a dedicated communication to the senior leadership team, dedicated communication to HR, supply chain, finance, etc. So really taking the time to create a digital strategy library in that case. Everybody really understood what her or his contribution is to the change. I think that's for me best in class. And then, the right measures in terms of support throughout the change curve or change journey. I think that's for me best in class. And the opposite is obviously not doing it.
Okay. And every company says we communicated clearly, but often employees do say the opposite. It's something I've seen in a variety of different organizations throughout my career. So what does effective communication look like during the change, and what should leaders do more of or stop doing?
Yeah. Well, usually communication breaks down. More often you see this, the senior leadership and -1 being a happy crew, right? They really understand each other, but then, there is a gap between senior management and middle management. And that's also the case because those senior leaders have had time to have conversation with the executive committees, but, management employees have not been involved. So for me, good companies are actually making sure that the communication, as I said, is shared in a way which everyone understands, and that they're actually making sure that they're measuring the understanding in a very regular way with the employees via engagement surveys, which are particularly in that phase needed to be done at least 3-4 times per year, to understand how the understanding of the people is, because then you can act on it. And that requires an accessible communication platform, formalized communication, information packages, newsletter, meet the management sessions, etc. And if you do that in a consequent manner, then I think you have a higher chance of well-informed employees.
Excellent. Okay. Even when restructures are necessary, they can fracture culture. How do you rebuild, a healthy culture and reestablish momentum afterwards?
Yeah.
It's a tricky one.
Yeah,
Because it's different. It's different in every business.
yeah. I mean, for me, the definition of culture is actually the behaviors of people which are accepted and supported in an organization,
Hmm.
right? So if you want to rebuild the company, I'm assuming you are moving from a certain culture to another culture. If it's an evolution, I think it all starts with having clarities about the do and don'ts in the organization. So what are actually the behaviors you want leaders to live, and what is it what you don't want to see?
Hmm.
And the easiest way, I don't know, it is not easy, right? It takes time, but
Yeah.
the most promising way of implementing a new culture is to re-engineer the employee experience from hire to retire, meaning from the onboarding to the actual performance evaluations, how we promote people, how we train people, etc. So you need to make sure that this new metrics or new behaviors or new ways of working are actually integrated in the DNA of the organization. And you need to ensure that leaders actually understand their role in co-owning the culture.
Yeah.
Meaning, how do you actually enable your leaders so that they can live up to those behaviors? How do you assess those leaders? How do you reward the leaders in a way where you measure their performance, but also their behavior, right?
Hmm.
And take actions with leaders which are actually not living up to the standards,
Hmm.
right? And then I think, that's the way to go, right? But that's,
Yeah.
not a 1 month exercise. It will take 1 or 2 years to actually build up this culture.
Further to that, how do you stop an element of potentially micromanaging if you are taking that route, trying to build that new culture, but obviously trying to stay away from the micromanagement style of management?
Yeah, that's actually when you are defining how to lead, right? The behaviors how
Hmm.
to lead need to be quite explicit what leading means, right? If it's about empowerment, if it's about enablement, etc., then you can measure it actually in engagement scores or in assessing leaders, in development centers, 360s, etc. So these are some measures which you can introduce in addition to what I said
Okay.
to avoid management as well.
Yeah. A lot of our audience are hiring managers, people with direct reports in the specialty ingredients world. What advice would you give to them if they're about to lead or inherit a team post restructure?
Well, it's to work on the culture and to really start to build a safe space, right? A psychological safe space. And
Hmm.
that happens actually by having an open dialogue about expectations, about ways of working, and really listening to people and their fears, right?
Hmm.
And then actually leading with clarity and direction by translating strategy into the functional strategy where they're working, and providing the means so that people understand that they're on the right track, by managing performance and behaviors, right? Which is guaranteeing that everybody's playing along the same rules of the game. And then, constant support and listening and development, having a
Hmm.
little bit of a coaching mindset as well, mentoring people, coaching people so that they can regain trust in the organization and particularly trust in the leader.
Great. Okay. And what about for the candidate side of things, the employees of a business? I mean, many people find themselves looking for new roles after restructures. Maybe they've been
Yeah.
made redundant. Maybe the new restructure, they have a role, but it just doesn't feel right for them anymore.
Yeah.
They might feel a little bit of resentment for the change, a little bit of bitterness.
Yeah.
I mean, what would you say to someone going through that right now?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if you have the perception of losing authority or influence, that's not easy. I would recommend to actually have conversations, really fully understand the scope and what is required, and then, having a deep reflection if the role is for you or not,
Hmm.
giving it a try. But sometimes, the role is not for you anymore. And then it's about having the courage to move on. I've been in situations where my role has changed. That was not easy for myself. But then I had to realize, okay, well, that's not for me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there are always existential questions, a little bit of fear involved, but sometimes, more often a new beginning offers new opportunities. I would just encourage people to be courageous as well,
Mm-hmm.
make the right decision for them,
And
and to have conversations with the leader as well, because that's the leader's role to actually help find the right answer and to clarify if insecurities are there.
Yeah. And there's some great advice there for both clients in terms of hiring managers with direct reports and from the candidate side there. So really, really some good advice. This has been incredibly valuable. And I think there's going to be a lot of good takeaways for different people that listen to this podcast. I mean, you've given a real view into how organized navigate these moments and what leaders need to get right. What I would like to say is thank you to everyone listening. We hope you've got some great takeaways from this discussion today. And if you found this episode useful, please feel free to share it and make sure you are subscribed for future episodes throughout 2026. Until next time, Beat, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate all of your insights.
Thank you very much.